Okay. So, thank you for coming, for being here tonight. I hope this subject is going to be very interesting for everyone. It's a very popular subject, Nietzsche's teaching of will to power. It's very controversial as well, which is interesting and nice for us tonight. Nietzsche has developed many different teachings, but this one somehow permeates throughout all his writings, all his books. Now, the problem, let's start with the problem first. It's always nice to start with the problem. It's easier. So the problem with Nietzsche's teaching of will to power is historical, and not necessarily only in the way that notorious Nazi ideologists have presented Nietzsche as their ideological guru, but also among the academics and Nietzsche scholars, we have different opinions about the teaching of will to power. The opinions are split. Tonight I'm going to be talking about my opinion, of course, and what I agree and disagree. But let me start first with the historical misinterpretation of Nietzsche's teaching of will to power. Nazis used Nietzsche in order to justify their theory of supreme Aryan race that as such needs to lead the world. And by doing that, everything will be justified, whatever they do, for the higher goals, for the higher achievement, for the Aryan race to be the one which will be obeyed, to be the one to give the culture to the world. Very similar to Romans. So they use Nietzsche, and especially some passages of his writings. The most notorious passages are actually the ones in which Nietzsche also mentions something that can be actually connected to Nazi ideology. And those passages are from aphorisms which Nietzsche never published. That's very interesting. From his knuckles, actually from notes that have been collected by his sister, Elizabeth, who was Nazi supporter and a member of Nazi party as well. So after Nietzsche collapsed in 1888, he lived the last 11 years of his life completely mentally incapacitated. He couldn't speak, couldn't talk. She published that book as she titled it The Will to Power. Now, Nietzsche wanted to publish a book that he would call a revaluation of all values, but he never did, obviously. So she inherited all his notes, put them together in a way that will be easier to justify Nazi politics. Mm-hmm. And from those passages, Nazis have taken certain parts and used them, or actually abused them, misinterpreted them in their own ideology. So what are the passages that Nietzsche mentions in The Will to Power? So there is a famous one which is about the blonde beast. Obviously Nazis used it as a blonde beast would be represented in the metaphor from German race for Aryan nation which is supposed to rule the world. So what Nietzsche actually says about the blonde beast. So in a genealogy of morality, he says that one cannot fail to see at the bottom of all these noble races the beast of prey, the blonde beast, which is prowling around in search for spoil and victory. So taken out of the whole aphorism, that gives justice to Nazi ideology. But then aphorism doesn't finish there. doesn't finish there. So the aphorism continues, and Nietzsche says that animal, that energy has to erupt from time to time, and the animal has to go to the wilderness. Therefore, he says, the Roman, Arabian, Germanic, Japanese nobility, as well as Homeric heroes and Scandinavian Vikings, they all share this need. So immediately you can see that he's not talking about people who have blue eyes and blonde hair, because he's mentioning Arabs, he's mentioning Japanese, and Romans, and Greeks, etc., etc. So his intention absolutely wasn't racially and national based, but it was something else. He wants to talk to us about some other urge, which is present in all these great, as he called them, noble races. Why they're noble races, we will see a little bit later on. Now, this is, in a way, attempt historically to hijack his blonde beast aphorism, but as we explain now, this is what usually happens when you look at the part of some writing, the part of the aphorism, a little section of the book, but you don't continue to actually scrutinize the book in the way that every book should be, as I explained to you earlier on, read. As I like to say to people who talk to me about books and how to read books, I said, by reading philosophy, your notebook should end up being bigger than the book that you were reading. Because if you don't take notes after every sentence that you read, if you don't ask questions, why do you like this? Why do you dislike? What do you think? Why you disagree or agree? That you're not reading philosophy. So imagine now how easy it is to deceive people, to deceive followers, party members, or whoever else is following you, if you just cherry pick from the book what you want in order to defend your purpose. Now, I have to say that this is not only common practice in politics, but is also common practice in academia, as some know here as well, very well. And in my dissertation, actually, I argued against a lot of academics, Nietzsche scholars, who are teaching philosophy around the globe, for the same reason, because I believe that they did not scrutinize properly all his work, and especially his early period.
Nash,
So,
can
yes.
I ask you a question?
Not now, please. Let me finish the lecture, and then you can ask as many questions as you. So, it is important, before I just go into details regarding will to power, to mention something about chronological development of Nietzsche's teaching. Now, everybody's life, everybody's work, everybody's writing can be split into three sections, obviously, early, middle, and late. So it doesn't take a scientist to work that out. And I found out that talking about these three phases in Nietzsche's philosophy can only be justified if you talk about chronological development. Okay? This is the early phase, for example, from 72 till, let's say, gay science 1882. And then your middle period and your late period. But thematically, I completely disagree with everybody who defended this thesis that, oh, this book belongs to the Nietzsche's early period, and then later on Nietzsche developed something else. He matured in philosophy. He didn't say that in the beginning. So I didn't agree with that, because reading his first book, The Birth of Tragedy, actually showed me everything else that Nietzsche has talked later on. So the seeds of his philosophy, all his teachings, could be found in The Birth of Tragedy. And for me, it was unacceptable that people of high authority when it comes to Nietzsche's academics, academy in the world, academia, didn't see that. And this was the subject of my thesis. So I argued that The Birth of Tragedy can be taken and understood as the template for later Nietzsche's work. They would say, oh, Nietzsche first time mentions will to power in gay science in 1882. And not in 1872 when he published The Birth of Tragedy. Well, that's true. But this is only superficial observation, because Nietzsche says clearly in Twilight of Idols, he says, in The Birth of Tragedy I didn't mention with one word Christianity, but my silence was very loud for everybody who could have read between the lines, that the whole book was actually geared against Christian morality. So you don't have to mention something in order to be present. Therefore, but he mentions actually, not necessarily with the same words, with the different words, but the same subject. He doesn't say will to power, he doesn't say Übermensch, he doesn't say higher type of individuals, but he does say more nobly formed natures. And he says tragic illusion is only made for nobly formed natures. So who are these nobly formed natures? Obviously, this is the beginning of his ideas and development of Übermensch and Overman, and also their action is nothing else but will to power, which I will explain a little bit later. So this is a few words just about the chronological development of his teaching of will to power. So what is will to power, and what provoked Nietzsche to start teaching about it, thinking about it, and developing some new theory? Well, Nietzsche's predecessors was his great teacher, Arthur Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer was a pessimistic philosopher. I had a couple of lectures, or maybe more, a few years ago on Schopenhauer. So Schopenhauer was a pessimist. For him, life was not justified, and life could not be affirmed. Therefore, everything that causes suffering should be renounced. So what is causing suffering? Life itself. But what is life? Life is all about desires and passions and instincts. So Schopenhauer says in order to avoid suffering, because suffering is intrinsically something bad, we have to renounce our desires. Meaning we have to renounce life. And this is his pessimism, or as Nietzsche would say, Buddhistic nihilism. Nietzsche wanted to create something else. So in his first book, he wants to justify life. And he does that through art. Nietzsche agrees with Schopenhauer when it comes to descriptive aspect of suffering. And he does that by quoting Silenus, which is the companion of Dionysus. So what Silenus says? Well, legend has it that when King Midas tried to capture Dionysus, the god of wine and passion and sexual frenzy and intoxication, he wanted to capture Dionysus in order to learn from Dionysus what is the best to do in life. But they couldn't capture Dionysus, they captured his companion, which is Silenus. And they forced him to tell King Midas what is the best for us to do in this life. So Silenus famously said, "Oh, wretched ephemeral race, children of chance and misery, why do you compel me to tell you what is far beyond your reach, something that you don't want to know? The best for you to do is never to be born, not to be nothing. And the second best is to die soon." So obviously Nietzsche takes this passage from Aristotle and introduces us to Schopenhauer's pessimism. Yes, he agrees about his descriptive aspect of pessimism, but he disagrees about the evaluative aspect of pessimism. He sees pessimism as something different. Suffering. In Zarathustra, he says, "Indeed, the truth was not hit by the one who shot at it with the word will to existence, because that will does not exist. Which does not exist cannot will. Where is life, there is will. And that will is will to power." This is what Zarathustra says. So Nietzsche in Zarathustra delivers the message that there is no such a thing as will to live as Schopenhauer propounded. There is only, because something that already lives cannot will to live. It lives already, so must be living something else, must be willing something else. So whatever exists wills power. And he says the wish to preserve oneself is the symptom of condition of distress, of a limitation of the really fundamental instinct of life. which aims at the expansion of power and wishing for that. So while Schopenhauer taught that essence of life is actually blind and purposeless will, or will to live, Nietzsche says no, that such a will doesn't exist, because whatever already lives cannot be willing living. It must be willing something else, and this is will to power. And then he continues in Beyond Good and Evil. He says, physiologists should think before putting down the instinct of self-preservation as the cardinal instinct of organic being. A living thing seeks above all to discharge its strength. Life itself is will to power. So you can see that Nietzsche is very clear, is very categorical about proposition that we don't, living creatures, will power, live to discharge their strength, not just to live, because he says only what is decaying and dying has the will for self-preservation, not healthy specimens of all species. We know that very well from around the across the board. All species, the individuals, they fight for establishing their own presence in a way of power. But now when it comes to human beings, we will see what Nietzsche has to say shortly. So what is the nature of the will to power? The nature of the will to power is, I agree there with the what was his name? Bernard Resinger, yes, a scholar. A very good book he wrote calling Nietzsche's Life Affirmation. And he argues that actually will to power is nothing else but overcoming resistance. Nietzsche says in Beyond Good and Evil that life itself is essentially appropriation, injury, overpowering of what is alien and weaker, suppression, hardness, imposition of one's own forms. So this can be also very, very debatable sentence of the aphorism 259 in Beyond Good and Evil. But Nietzsche doesn't finish there. There is much more to say to it. He says the game of resistance and victory consists in a little hindrance that is overcome and immediately followed by another little hindrance that is again overcome. So we are closing down to a paradox of the will to power. If overcoming of resistance is the goal, is the will to power, then clearly achieving that overcoming must result in a satisfaction for which that resistance exists in the first place. So overcoming that resistance at first sight should be conquered, and the one who does that should be happy. But then if will to power is overcoming resistance, what will happen if we overcome resistance and achieve that in a particular state of overcoming? Then the will to power will cease. But this is not the essence of the will to power. The will to power is activity, perpetual activity that never stops. Meaning that the will to power actually is dissatisfaction, not a satisfaction. So once satisfied, the will to power ceases to exist, but is not, is the essence of life. This is the will to life for Nietzsche. It has to carry on. And he says, human beings do not seek pleasure and avoid displeasure. What human beings want, what every smallest organism wants, is an increase in power driven by that will that seeks resistance. They need something that opposes it. This pleasure as an obstacle to their will to power is therefore a normal fact. Human beings do not avoid it, they are rather in continual need of it. So the problem with that paradox keeps looming How do we get this will to power? How do we understand overcoming resistance? Zarathustra says, whatever I create and however much I love it, soon I must oppose it, and the love, thus the will, wills it. The agent in the pursuit of power does not seek achievement, but achieving it. So this is very important, because what would be, and then Zarathustra said, and life itself confined me to secret to me. Behold, it said, I am that which must always overcome itself. So life has to overcome itself. Now we are coming closer to understanding of Nietzsche's idea of the will to power. It's not overpowering somebody else, controlling somebody else. It's more about overcoming and controlling oneself. So who does that for Nietzsche? Who is the best representative of the will to power? This is the famous Nietzsche higher type of man. When I say man, I don't mean man as gender, I'm talking in a generic sense. Who is that higher type of human being? For Nietzsche, there were Goethe, Beethoven, and Nietzsche himself as well. These are the individuals that he praises as Übermensch. He also highly rates Napoleon and Caesar. These are the people who also achieved quite high, but not necessarily as high as these three main representatives of Übermensch, Overman, Goethe, Beethoven, and Nietzsche. So the characteristic of these higher men are first that they are solitary. They have their own laws, they have their own values, and they know that those values and those ethical norms won't be applicable to everyone. So they are aware of it. This is why they are actually solitary. They are not flock animals, they are more like eagles. As Giuliani, famous Italian poet, said, eagles are made to fly alone, sparrows fly in a flock. So this is very interesting to grasp this idea of Übermensch. It can be splitting the individual in half, or people like a sharp sword. And people may say, oh, but that means that we are not all Übermensch, or am I not? Is not really egalitarian philosophy. No, it's not egalitarian philosophy. It's very elitistic philosophy. But it doesn't mean that everyone should see itself as something under. Maybe should see themselves as something above. But how do we get ourselves above? We do that through overcoming, or perpetual becoming. Because the moment an individual thinks that he has reached the limit in his intellectual development, this is the end of it. There is no more will to power. And unfortunately, that happens to majority of people. Because our intellectual capabilities are literally unlimited. Psychologists know that very well. Unlimited. We can always know more in whatever we do. Or we can always try to be like Leonardo da Vinci, l'uomo universale, not just dentist, or just builder, or just a husband, but maybe dentist and a musician. Maybe you can try something else. Maybe you can start reading philosophy for a change. So we can always do something else, something more, something better. So this is Nietzsche's idea about will to power, to want oneself to become more, better. This is that appropriation. This is that conquest. This is the conquest of the weaker. What is the weaker? How do we do that? How do we do that? Nietzsche says we do that in the second trait of Übermensch, which is creating unity. Unity of what? Unity of people? No. Unity of our inner drives. So in the famous aphorism in gay science, 290, which is called What is to be Done, Nietzsche says, to give style to one's character. This is great and rare art, practiced by those who explore strengths and weaknesses of their nature and then fit them in an artistic plan until every single one of them becomes art and reason, and even weaknesses delight the eye. This is unification of strengths and weaknesses of one's nature and fitting them into an artistic plan, fitting them into something beautiful. Until every single one of those weaknesses and strengths become reason and art. And even weaknesses, so that the worst in us delight the eye. We can't take them out of ourselves, but we can unite them with the strengths. And that unification of inner drives, for Nietzsche, this is what is needed to give style to one's character. Now he says, it will be the strong and domineering natures that enjoy their first gaiety in such constraint and perfection under the law of their own. Conversely, it is the weak characters without power over themselves that hate the constraint of the style. They feel that if this bitter and evil constraint were imposed upon them, they would be demeaned. They become slaves as soon as they serve. So this is the answer in one aphorism. I know it's very complicated, but this is why we are here, and you're going to help me to understand this even better. And then he continues in the same aphorism, just to make our life a little bit easier. He says, for one thing is needful, that a human being should attain satisfaction with himself. Only then is a human being at all tolerable to behold. Whoever is dissatisfied with himself is continually ready for revenge, and we others, we will be his victims, if only by having to endure his ugly side. In the presence of what is ugly, one feels bad and gloomy. So you're getting it now, that Nietzsche doesn't talk about will to power in the sense of overcoming, ruling, overpowering others, because that will be easy in a way. But what is the biggest challenge, the biggest resistance that one can overcome, is actually overcoming of oneself. And this is how it boils down into teaching of becoming. Becoming what? Becoming the best that one can be. So imagine if the world understood Nietzsche like this from the very beginning. But how can the world understand such a great mind when the world doesn't spend time reading his work and understanding in a way that that work should be understood and appreciated? And if everybody was like that, how would that reflect itself into our political lives? That would be heaven. That would be heaven. Why? Because of our abilities and our potentials, which are unlimited. Only when they are limited and constrained, people are very easy to manipulate on any side. On any side. And then Nietzsche says the noble human being honors himself as one who is powerful, also as one who has power over himself, who knows how to speak and be silent, who delights in being severe and hard with himself, and respect all severity and hardness. And with this sentence I'm going to finish, so you're going to have more time to ask questions. Thank you for listening, and I'm giving the floor to you now.